SLT අලුත් මෙගා ලයින් කනෙක්ෂන් වලට 50%ක දීවන. තවත් ඔෆර් ගැන දැනගන්න 12112 අමතන්න.
Tonight, emerging through a fog, former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa returns to the island, dismisses allegations against him. Causes of all problems. President Maithripala Sirisena doubles down on scrapping the Grade 5 scholarship. Budget 2019 dissected. The United Nations Children's Fund points to where the budget would have been better off. Done and dusted. Sri Lankan cricketers ink the agreement on contract revision. All this and much more coming up on First at 9 this Friday, 12th of April 2019.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to First at 9 on AdaDerana 24 Sri Lanka's news channel. I am Katharina Chang. Former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa returned to the country today from the United States amid much speculation. An organisation dubbed the International Truth and Justice Project claimed that notices issued by US courts over 2 civil suits were served to the former defence recently during his time in the United States. Speaking to media at the Bandaranaike International Airport this morning, the former Defence Secretary brushed off the allegations against him and said the legal measures necessary for him to renounce his US citizenship were successfully completed. The former Defence Secretary is mooted to be a presidential candidate, and renouncing any dual citizenship is a prerequisite.
Former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa was on a 3-week visit to the United States to take steps necessary to renounce his US citizenship. EK650, an Emirates flight carrying him, arrived at the Katunayake Bandaranaike International Airport at around 8:35 this morning. A number of parliamentarians representing the joint opposition were at the airport to welcome the former Defence Secretary. I went to the United States to proceed with necessary legal measures to renounce my US citizenship, and I completed them successfully. It's during that time this story of civil lawsuits being filed against me, with one being over the death of a journalist while the other over the arrest of a civilian, where the plaintiff is seeking compensation, came up, claiming that I should bear responsibility as the then Defence Secretary. According to US law, they should hand over the summons to me through civil organisations, unlike in Sri Lanka. However, as I believe, they haven't done that properly. Anyway, my lawyers in the United States are working on nullifying it. This was done with a political agenda because although I have been to the United States numerous times before, no person ever asked me for compensation. This is done targeting the presidential election by an NGO run by the LTTE diaspora and some factions in Sri Lanka. I'm sad to say that the consulate in California too is behind this incident. I think it is very unfair to engage in politics in such a spiteful manner. A considerable crowd gathered outside the airport to welcome the former Defence Secretary. He spoke to media once more before leaving the airport. I thank everyone who gathered here today for the encouragement they are giving me. No one can destroy my exuberance by doing things like this. I'm used to challenges like this and I was very determined when the LTTE bombed me. Such spiteful actions are reason for encouragement. The United National Party government carried out a malicious attempt with the help of their friendly nations to hinder Gotabaya Rajapaksa's future journey. Today he arrived in the country defeating all those efforts. Therefore we should tell the government that our strength is above all these attempts. We did not bring this crowd. They came here after getting to know Gotabaya Rajapaksa is returning to the country today. If international lawsuits are brought against the leadership which pioneered the conclusion of the 30-year conflict, people in Sri Lanka will stand beside him, irrespective of their ethnicity.
Well, President Maithripala Sirisena once more stood firm behind his decision to abolish the Grade 5 scholarship, saying that the fierce competition created by it leaves both children and parents restless. Speaking at a discussion held at the Presidential Secretariat regarding the Grade 5 scholarship, the head of state insisted that decision-making powers pertaining to education should be taken away from the hands of politicians. The President also noted that 60% of students enrolled in schools in Colombo are in fact not from Colombo, and the good school, bad school concept cannot possibly exist.
A discussion was held regarding the Grade 5 scholarship between President Maithripala Sirisena and academics at the President's official residence yesterday. Out of 4 million students, around 3.8 million are attempting to get into so-called popular schools which can only accommodate 200,000. This makes both students and parents restless. Parents claim they need to give their students a good school. It is not possible to have good schools and bad schools. Surveys show that a majority is asking to abolish the Grade 5 scholarship while asking for an alternative. When considering schools in Colombo, only 40% of students are from Colombo and the rest are not from Colombo. Students from other areas are enrolled to these schools through Grade 5 scholarship as well as via acquaintances. This results in children in the periphery of Colombo not having a school to attend, and this is a big issue. The scholarship is the main reason behind this. The Grade 5 scholarship is the main reason behind this. Decisions on education should not be taken by politicians. It's academics who should take these decisions. Short-term and long-term solutions are needed for this issue, and they should start from somewhere, but I don't see such a thing happening. Don't hand over education to politicians. Academics in this country who are present here today, as well as those who are not, should take decisions about education and announce it to the country. They should be straightforward in this endeavour. The issue here is how many of those who pass out from colleges of education fix their transfers without serving in remote areas of the country with the help of politicians. No teacher comes to me asking for transfers because I reject them.
The entire country is gearing up to celebrate the looming Sinhala and Tamil New Year, which dawns on Sunday. Throngs of people are leaving cities for their family homes to visit their loved ones, keeping with tradition. But before that, streets of Colombo were as busy as they get, with people doing their last-minute shopping.
With the Sinhala and Tamil New Year less than 2 days away, the streets of Petta in Colombo were packed with families doing their last-minute shopping for the festive season. Special arrangements have been made to accommodate the public who wish to travel out of Colombo. The Sri Lanka Transport Board has allocated 800 buses, apart from the 2,000 SLTB buses, to provide a 24-hour service until the 15th of this month. The SLTB has also allocated 800 buses, which will be in operation from the 16th to the 21st for those who wish to return to Colombo from outstations. Meanwhile, the number of bus journeys along expressways too have been increased from 150 to 300. According to the Private Bus Owners Association, special arrangements have also been made for the public owing to the festive season. Meanwhile, a special train service will be provided from Fort and Maradana railway stations for those who wish to travel out stations. 14 trains will be used for this purpose until the 22nd of this month. This afternoon, passengers travelling from the Fort railway station were severely inconvenienced owing to delays. In the meantime, police media spokesperson SP Ruwan Gunasekara announced that 2,400 police officers have been deployed in Colombo and its suburbs to nab drunk drivers during the festive season. The Prisons Department meanwhile stated that the time period to visit prison inmates for the Sinhala and Tamil New Year has been extended to 5 days. Therefore, relatives of inmates are able to pay their visits for 5 days starting from tomorrow. Previously, relatives of inmates were allowed to call on them only on the day of the Sinhala and Tamil New Year and one other day. However, the extension was allowed, taking into consideration various issues, including transport-related ones, that relatives of inmates have to face during the festive season.
Amnesty International makes an urgent appeal to President Maithripala Sirisena requesting that the head of state reconsider his decision to hang 13 prisoners and to commute their sentences. In a letter addressed to the President, Amnesty International says, quote, "Please retain Sri Lanka's positive death penalty record and establish a moratorium on all executions with a view to abolish the death penalty entirely," unquote. It states that there is complete secrecy around the dates identified for the prisoners' execution and that no information about their case histories are shared. The plea further says, quote, "It is unknown whether the individual had fair trials, access to lawyers, or whether they were able to be engaged in a meaningful clemency process," unquote. It goes on to note that there is no coming back from a flawed judicial process. The punishment is absolute. The mistakes are irredeemable, which can lead to someone innocent paying the ultimate price. The letter concludes stating, quote, "If you implement the death penalty, it is a line you cannot uncross," unquote. The Department of Government Printing, which was under the Ministry of Defence, has been gazetted under the Ministry of Lands and Parliamentary Reforms. The extraordinary gazette notification dated today and signed by President Maithripala Sirisena was issued by the Presidential Secretariat. As per the notification, matters relating to the government printing and publication will thereby come under the purview of the Ministry of Lands and Parliamentary Reforms. The Department of Government Printing was brought under the Ministry of Defence by the President in November last year during Sri Lanka's political impasse. Meanwhile, Russia has decided to introduce a new form of asbestos to Sri Lanka, which is more environmentally friendly. Visiting ministers of healthcare of Russia, Sergei A. Kravyov, have conveyed the decision to Minister of Health Dr. Rajda Senratna during a discussion in Colombo recently. Now, this new form of asbestos has been produced to suit the climatic conditions of the country. Now, the United Nations Children's Fund commenced Sri Lanka's 2019 budget, saying that it brings positive news for the social sectors. It, however, stressed that a high priority must be given to investment in the key social sector plans that allow for the realization of Sri Lankan children's rights. The international agency added that such investment must be informed by global trends in policy and practice for children and ensure sustainability primarily through domestic revenue generation. It further added that some key challenges highlighted in the report include unacceptably high levels of undernutrition, violence against children and women, as well as difficulty in children's access to adequate, timely and efficient services in the justice sector.
The United Nations Children's Fund released a report recently detailing its observations on Sri Lanka's Budget Speech 2019. The report focused on several areas which include health, education, disabilities and women empowerment. Highlighting allocations made towards health, UNICEF says that as the government continues to strengthen primary healthcare services with a greater focus on non-communicable diseases, it is crucial that the allocations to maternal and child health be maintained or improved to ensure that advances are made in this area. Furthermore, UNICEF believes that in education, with an allocation of 32,000 billion rupees for infrastructure improvement alone, will certainly benefit the students. However, it will not directly address some of the main issues behind school dropouts, such as poor academic performance, financial problems, or having to support family businesses. In terms of addressing disabilities, UNICEF says the budget must ensure that special needs of children with disabilities is given attention, both in terms of access to and quality of services received, such as inclusive education. UNICEF also noted that the focus on strengthening the social safety net is also very welcomed, particularly in the efforts taken to streamline the Samurdhi program, but added that the government should be able to clearly articulate what it wants to achieve with its social protection system, taking into account the level of development of the country as well as the remaining challenges. They say that for children in particular, realizing their rights to social security and adequate standard of living, health, education and care, and achieving the 2030 agenda will not be possible without a conducive policy framework that prioritizes children's needs and requirements, and that includes an inclusive, rights-based social protection system for Sri Lanka. The report went on to say that given the unacceptably high, persistent malnutrition in the country, it would have been encouraging to see the issue of nutrition receive prominence in the budget speech, which was not the case this year. In terms of early childhood, UNICEF says that there is a mismatch between what the scientific and economic evidence shows and what is prioritized in the budget as it relates to education of young children. UNICEF points out that while it is promising that overall public investment in education is expected to grow in 2019, public spending on early childhood education remains unearmarked in this year's budget. Highlighting concerns under the subject of child development, the report says that the budget should have adequate allocation of funds to allow for implementation of the newly approved alternative care policy for children in Sri Lanka. In conclusion, the UNICEF says that as Sri Lanka aims to empower the people and nurture the poor, a high priority must be given to investment in key social sector plans that allow for the realization of Sri Lankan children's rights.
And with that, we cross over to a short commercial break, but make sure you stay tuned for more news on the other side.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is AdaDerana 24.
Sri Lanka and the World Bank signed 2 new agreements worth $150 million in Washington recently to improve climate resilience and agriculture productivity for small farmers and support priority infrastructure through public-private partnerships. A communication by the World Bank says that the 2 projects are designed to leverage private sector financing for infrastructure and address climate vulnerability in the agriculture sector. 2 agreements which support climate-resilient agriculture and infrastructure services in Sri Lanka were signed during the World Bank Group and IMF spring meetings in Washington, D.C. recently, with the presence of World Bank and government representatives, including World Bank Vice President for the South Asia region, Hartwig Schaefer, World Bank Country Director for the Maldives, Nepal and Sri Lanka, Swari Raidaho, and State Minister of Finance, Eran Wickramaratne. The new projects include $125 million of credit for the climate-smart irrigated agriculture project, which will improve the resilience and productivity of agriculture for more than 470,000 small farmers in 6 provinces in the dry zone of the country. Furthermore, a $25 million loan will be granted for the framework development and infrastructure financing to support public-private partnerships projects, which will help Sri Lanka develop a platform to attract and sustain investments required to fulfill its future development priorities. According to the World Bank, the $25 million loan has a 20-year maturity, including a 9-year grace period and a $2 million counterpart funding. The arrest of WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange yesterday by UK police at London's Ecuadorian embassy has given further cause for Russia and the US to be on opposing sides. Russia sees Assange's detention as a violation of journalists' right and freedom of speech and promises to raise this issue in international organizations. Assange was arrested after his South American host abruptly revoked his 7-year asylum, paving the way for his extradition to the United States. Meanwhile, Ecuador today announced the arrest of a man with close ties to Assange while attempting to leave the country.
WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange was convicted by a London court yesterday of skipping bail in 2012 after an extradition order to Sweden over an allegation of rape. The allegation was, however, dropped in 2017. Assange, who pleaded not guilty, will be sentenced at a later date when he will face a maximum sentence of 12 months in prison for the offence. Assange's arrest comes a day after WikiLeaks accused the Ecuadorian government of an extensive spying operation against Assange by secretly filming his meetings with lawyers and a doctor inside the embassy over the past year. Following the arrest, US prosecutors announced charges against WikiLeaks founder, accusing him of conspiring with former Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to gain access to a government computer as part of one of the largest compromises of classified information in US history. Assange's arrest paved way for his possible extradition to the US, and he faces up to 5 years in prison on the American charge. In the lead-up to the arrest, Ecuador suspended Julian Assange's citizenship and accused him and others at WikiLeaks of collaborating in attempts to destabilize the Andean nation's government. Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno accused Assange of assaulting staff at the country's embassy in London as he defended the country's decision to revoke Assange's 7-year asylum. Ecuador's former president Rafael Correa, however, who offered Assange refuge in 2012, said his arrest by British police in Ecuadorian embassy came in breach of international law and the Ecuadorian constitution, which forbids the extradition of its nationals. Correa believes that the arrest came as retaliation after WikiLeaks outed information showing important transactions by the family of Ecuador's current president Lenin Moreno. And Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison, meanwhile, had this to say.
Well, Julian Assange will get the same consular support and assistance that any other Australian would receive. People's fame and doesn't make any difference on the impact of how these decisions are made. He's an Australian citizen. He'll have that support. He'll get the same treatment as everyone else. Nothing special.
US Secretary of Agriculture yesterday criticized Vietnam's move to ban imports of glyphosate-based herbicides, saying the decision would have devastating impacts on global agriculture production. Vietnam's government said in a statement that the toxic level of herbicides containing glyphosate had long been of concern in the latest display of global worries over the production's impact on human health. State media reports said the ban would take effect in June. Glyphosate, the chemical contained in Bayer's AG's best-selling weed killer Roundup, is the target of thousands of lawsuits in the United States, alleging exposure to its causes cancer. In August last year, San Francisco jurors ruled that Roundup gave a former school groundskeeper terminal cancer. They awarded him $289 million in damages.
Industrial farmers alike, there's never been a herbicide like it before.
The first privately funded mission to the moon has crashed on the lunar surface after the apparent failure of its main engine. The Israeli spacecraft called Bereshit attempted a soft landing but suffered technical problems on its descent to the moon's surface. The aim of the mission was to take pictures and conduct experiments. Israel hopes to become the 4th country to land a spacecraft on the moon. Only government space agencies from the former Soviet Union, the US and China have made successful moon landings. On to other international news. A long-time president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, was overthrown and arrested yesterday after months of street protests. Large crowds have remained on the streets of the capital Khartoum through the night, ignoring a curfew declared by the military. But demonstrators say the military council, which has taken power, is part of the regime. The fresh standoff has raised fears of a violent confrontation between protesters and the army. There is also real danger that different elements of the security forces and militia could turn their guns on each other. Meanwhile, Pope Francis, in a dramatic gesture, knelt to kiss the feet of previously warring leaders of South Sudan as he urged them to not return to a civil war. He urged South Sudan's President Salva Kiir, his former deputy turned rebel leader Riek Machar, and 3 other vice presidents to respect an armistice and commit to forming a unity government next month. They signed a peace agreement last year that brought the war, which claimed the lives of 400,000 people, to an end. And with that, we cross over to a short commercial break, but make sure you stay tuned for some sports news on the other side.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is AdaDerana 24.
And before we end the bulletin, revisiting one of the international news, the International Criminal Court has rejected a request to investigate alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. Now, in a press release, judges of the court highlighted Afghanistan's instability and the lack of cooperation with investigators in the country. Now, such an investigation would not serve the interest of justice. The rejection comes a week after the US revoked the entry visa of an ICC prosecutor, and is thought to be in response to her examination of possible crimes committed by US forces in Afghanistan. Now, we have more news like this also on our website, and of course you can catch the repeat of this telecast on YouTube. But we would like to thank our viewers for joining us. Have a pleasant evening.